most of the things that I discuss in my work talks about basically me being a person of color navigating through a society where the standard is not really meant for people like me. So there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of anger um, that um, comes out within my work. But then there's also that moment of quietness that is involved where it discusses or it expresses those moments where I am just in deep thought of like my existence in the country. And that also relates to me being a first generation immigrant and how, almost being um, uprooted from a place that I called home. So I talk a lot about the imperialism or colonialism um, between, Japan, the US, and Spain, and what it had done to the country. And just really digging into that history and finding ways or methods where I can either express those historical happenings in abstract ways or something that's even more straightforward, while also thinking about how it affects me, right now, today. Um, and then, just figuring out techniques of just playing around with materials and all that, and how that plays with, contemporary work. I have a friend who's a really successful poet in California, and she actually wrote that short poem about um, forgetting that her skin is a ruin, or I forget forgetting that my skin is a ruin. The poem really spoke to me, and so I asked permission from her if I could use it, and she graciously allowed me to use it to be made into my work. It basically talks about how um, the skin alone, or a person of color skin, whether you're black, brown, is an evidence of trauma, and that in context of history, it always has been either criminalized or demonized. Even like Disney movies, where let's say like in The Lion King, um, Scar has like black hair and he's darker compared to Mufasa, who has like this long blonde hair. Even if my work is kind of, a lot of folks perceive it as negative, it's also hopeful, um, because I believe that when we um, face the facts and face history, then that's a reason why the piece is very straightforward. Um, then that's when we can start healing as a community. When I work with certain materials and I'm painting over them, I usually talk about still being in this mindset of having colonial mentality, which is one of the biggest topics that I discuss in my work. With colonial mentality, there's whitewashing and erasure happening to my culture, and that's the reason why I paint over a lot of these textures, a lot of these found materials, and there are also, and I make sure that there are portions where I show what is underneath, to show that it's either a reductive process or an additive process of, of allowing myself to heal from that colonial mentality. My studio practice is pretty much play. Whenever I find, whenever I go, I have materials that are laid out. Whenever I go thrifting for certain materials, because it's almost like a treasure hunt whenever I go out. Of course, still following COVID guidelines, but whenever I just look and explore and just keep an eye open to whatever material I find and just think about the possibilities of how I can use them. Um, that's where I get so excited, and then I love that my wife supports me for it because, she also loves thrifting and I'm really happy about that. Um, so to me, it's really playing with all these materials, of using my hands and feeling all of these materials and just thinking of ways of making two things that don't really come together work. I think it goes back and forth, and I think that just where the play comes into play, in the perspective. I don't really have a specific process of making work. Usually I get inspired by reading articles or like books that talk about whatever happened during the Philippine and American War, um, or like the Treaty of Paris, or um, like how there was a Filipino slave that was brought to England and he was displayed like a piece of property. I get inspired by a lot of these stories, and I feel like because the Philippines or Filipinos are very much, in a way, traumatized by so much colonization. I mean, those are three countries that colonized us, and for so many years, Spain had us for 300 years, um, to a point where um, we kind of like have forgotten our identities. So in a way, it's kind of like my personal mission to also talk about these stories and having um, Filipinos as well as the audience, um, while making it accessible to also everyone.